It's great to welcome back to the program today Rachel Bitecofer, who's an election forecaster and analyst, host of the podcast The Election Whisperer, as well as the founder of Strike Pack. Rachel, always great having you on. Thank you.
Yeah, and David, I have to update my bio because I left Strike Pack in April and do independent work now.
Okay, well, we will make that change. We will update that. So listen, usually there's this conventional wisdom. When Democrats run on issues like abortion and gun safety, it doesn't do anything to get Democrats out to vote, but it angers Republicans. It gets Republicans out to vote against Democrats. And yet, when we look at the polling over the last 2 months, it seems as though talking about Roe v. Wade and talking about Republican inaction on gun safety is actually activating the Democratic base. And all of a sudden, the numbers are not looking as bad for Democrats as they typically would in the first midterm after winning the White House. Is that an accurate assessment, or am I missing something?
No, no, I'm going to say it's not. I'm going to say there's some things that I would push back on there.
Okay.
There is a perception, right? And I'm sure the progressive left is used to hearing this excuse as to why cultural issues have not been focused on in Democratic campaigns, this idea of cross mobilization, right? Like you're trying to mobilize your own base, but all you do is motivate the other one. That there is absolutely no data to support that assertion, and I have tried to prove it quantitatively before. So it's really important for people to understand that, the Republican Party has been fed that kind of messaging for years, and it doesn't necessarily motivate us. What motivates us is a fear or threat catalyst. So when I look at what happened in Kansas last night, I started talking once the memo leaked for the Roe evisceration. So if that memo comes to fruition and they, repeal Roe and all these abortion laws go into effect, the GOP is going to be able to ban, total abortion ban in the places they have trifecta control. What we're going to see is potentially something so strong and so catastrophic in the body politic that you could see a momentum change from the fundamental midterm fundamentals that are against the in party, right? And so what we saw initially was spontaneous protest pop up everywhere. That was a really good data sign, something similar to what we saw in 2017 and 2018 when we saw the Trump effect coming. And then, of course, Kansas is our first election since then. It was, of course, heavily focused on, it was the only thing on the ballot. So it's really important for people to understand that abortion salience from Roe is a product in Kansas, is a product of it being heavily focused on. So it's really important people focus on it. It's not going to be some residual effect that they can tap into without trying to harvest it. And it's based on negative partisanship. People are active, our side especially, when they feel threatened. And when Biden got elected, a lot of people rolled back that fear, and now it's back.
And so when you look at the 538 Senate forecast, for example, which has kind of ticked up and up, where now it says Democrats have a 57% chance of holding the Senate, that is the result of exactly the factors you just listed.
Yes, these are quantitative metrics. So I put out, if you follow me regularly on Twitter, and I recommend you do, and just read my thread, because it's really where I do most of my analysis these days because of time limitations. You'll see that I start talking about midterm effects. The midterm in the 4-year presidential term always hurts the in party, because the in party is the one getting all the bad headlines,
right?
Especially when it faces a dishonest opposition, right? And so when we talked about the midterm effect, I said, listen, there's been 2 interruptions in the midterm effect. Both of those were times when the national conversation got disrupted. And the most recent was 2002 with Bush, because keep in mind, he was seated into the presidency of a very, very large controversy and was not popular until 9/11. Right. And so that midterm would have been bruising for Republicans, and instead they gained seats. So I started talking about, look, if we can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend that fundamentals don't matter. So let's try to move the mechanisms that move the midterm effect. And that's about national referendum on the Republican Party. And we really are starting to see the system, resonate those changes in data.
So in 2002, like you say, at the time of the midterms, the president had a high approval rating as a result of 9/11. Right now, Joe Biden has a very low approval rating. I went back and looked. It looks like you have to go back to 1946 or 45. when a president at this point in their first term had this low an approval rating. It was Truman. Is the expectation that with Biden at 37%, that will specifically hurt Democrats in November, or have the two become disaggregated to some degree now versus 20 years ago?
Oh, absolutely disaggregated. And every time somebody tells me, oh, I did a cross-time analysis where it was like this in 1993. And I'm like, yeah, dude, because polarization is not, it's not some buzzword. It's a quantifiable behavioral characteristic that manifest in behavior across elites, the mass public, politicians, media system. And it has really disrupted the ability to look back in time and make comparisons, because let me explain why Biden's approval rating is so low, and also lower than Donald Trump's, when any objective assessment would definitely tell you which of these two presidencies were more controversial and turbulent. And the reason is because hyperpartisanship and polarization is asymmetrical. It affects the right side of the aisle more, which is why the Republican Party is having a flirt with fascism moment here. And one of the ways that it manifests is tribal allegiance. So whatever happened with Donald Trump, no matter how bad the headline was that week, his approval rating was stagnant. It was a flat line. That should never happen in a healthy democracy, okay? And once you started to see inelastic presidential approval, you start to realize, okay, I'm measuring latent partisanship in the electorate and not actual objectivity. So what you see with Biden and why he's worse than Trump, guys, you're going to love this, is because progressive Democrats are willing to tell pollsters that they're dissatisfied with what the administration's been able to get done. So you actually see an 80-20 partisan split on approval for Democrats versus what you might see a 90-95-10 for Donald Trump.
So I don't really make economic predictions, but just in taking a look at different indicators, it seems to me that next Tuesday we're going to get an inflation number for July that's significantly lower than that from June. There's going to be the ability for Democrats to accurately talk about the economy is looking better as we get into November. With the 3 months that remain between now and the midterm elections, is there an opportunity to get back to talking about the economy? Will it make a difference? Is that what Democrats should do if indeed inflation starts declining and the numbers look better?
I mean, here's the thing is, and I talk about this a lot, there's three issues that are going to dominate the midterm in terms of the availability of issues to affect things, which is mostly on coalitional turnout, but also conversion pool, that 10 or 15% of pure independents who can be affected, are going to be affected by the national atmosphere. And so what I've said with Democrats is, the Republican Party voted en masse against the one piece of legislation we were able to put on the floor to lower inflation. So you wedge that and you just hit them over the head with one theme. They had a chance to act against inflation, and what did they do? They put politics over you.
Is there any Senate race right now that you consider to be any kind of bellwether in a sense, or are the things that are happening, for example, in the Walker-Warnock race in Georgia, completely unrelated to what's happening with like Oz Fetterman in Pennsylvania? Or like, what are you looking at in terms of specific races?
Well, I mean, we've got a really interesting scenario when we think about Oz and Walker. I mean, both of these are really tremendously weak candidates. Okay? Yeah. So that, I mean, I think Pennsylvania was always going to be a toss-up and maybe advantage Fetterman against a normal nominee. And then luckily, and it's a product of bad nominee and also what the Fetterman campaign is doing with the clay that they have. Okay, so getting a bad nominee is one thing. Making use of that and using it as an effective branding weapon against your opponent is another. Okay, and so the reason we're seeing such good numbers out of Georgia and Pennsylvania right now is because both of those campaigns went aggressive, especially the outside groups too, in the case of Georgia, on branding the opponent and creating a disqualification effect. And that's really what Democrats have to do in this midterm. So normally, you might look at Republicans and be like, okay, inflation's high. They're not offering you inflation solutions, right? They run against one thing, and that is Democrats are socialists that want to turn your men child into women, and we're going to save you from it, right? So like when we think about So when you think about inflation and what that party is offering, they are so weak on the economy that it should not be hard at all for Democrats to disqualify change. And so when I talk about messaging on economy, on democracy, rights, freedom, and abortion, which all tie in, I'm really talking about messaging that is focused squarely on the Republican Party, making sure people understand what that party looks like today, how crazy and dangerous it is for them personally.
The asymmetrical aspect to this between Republicans and Democrats seems almost like scarily present in the Walker versus Warnock race, because I mean, Walker can barely explain a single position. Like the guy can barely speak. And we've talked before, like, is it CTE from football? Is it, there's all these different things. Okay, you can speculate about. He can't articulate his position on any issue. And yet he's only losing by like 8 or 9 points or something like that, which just shows the completely different standards that Republicans have for who they're willing to vote for.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, here's the thing. Once you get latent partisanship, so like no one's paying attention to this stuff right now that we know about. So, once the campaign actually gets going in September and the rest of the marginal voting population gets brought into the conversation, actually what you're going to see is his vote share probably will go up, not down, dude. And that's because they voted for a obvious child predator in Alabama, 90-10 in that special election that Doug Jones won. And Doug Jones won it, okay? But he did not win it because Republicans rejected a child predator. He won it because of of massive turnout and black vote and black voter turnout and a little bit of conversion pull off. It was a kind of like a perfect storm that allowed him to do it. But if they'll put him in the Senate, this man that had a New York, 11 accusations of being a child predator, they'll put anybody in there. It doesn't matter, because what they care about now is seizing power and then using it to crush us.
So let's talk a little bit in the last few minutes we have about the way in which 22 may impact 24, specifically for Trump and Biden. There's the idea that depending on how Trump endorsed and MAGA people do in 2022, it will impact whether Trump tries to be the nominee in 24. Another perspective is Trump's going to try because he thinks it'll keep him out of legal trouble. So there's like the Trump side of things. On the Biden side, I've never really felt Biden planned to run for re-election in 24. I just don't think he's doing it. I don't think he ever really wanted to. Jen Psaki from the get-go would say Joe Biden intends to run. And then when Kamala Harris said he's running, the next day she walked it back and said his intention is to run. So I just don't think he's running for re-election. How does what happens in 22 impact the potential candidacies of either of those two people?
I mean, I'm going to tell you, these two elections roll together, guys. If we do not show up in large numbers and defend democracy here in 22, then we stand potential to lose the governorships, no matter how bad the candidates are, in Michigan and Pennsylvania. If we were to lose either one of those, then we'd lose the blue wall, the big three, and that's the big three that hits 270. So we can lose Georgia, we can lose Arizona. Okay, and we may well lose those to fascist Republicans if people don't vote. But at the end of the day, like, we cannot lose Michigan and Pennsylvania, or we do not have a guarantee of a free and fair election at all for 2024. I mean, imagine a newly minted Republican governor of Michigan. Do you think they're going to be on the side of democracy or on the side of fascism? Right. I'm going with fascism.
What do you think about the Biden 24 thing? Have you given any thought to it?
Here's what I would say is if he doesn't plan on running, he doesn't act like that. To me, he is as cautious as any traditional first-term president, which is, if I had to offer a criticism to the administration, it would be that. This is a moment for Churchill, not Chamberlain. We need Winston Churchill posturally in that leadership position. We need somebody to speak very frankly headed into 22 about the stakes of this election, what's on the ballot across these 50 states and state legislatures and federal House elections, because, at the end of the day, he's got the bully pulpit. Nobody else has that bully pulpit. And I honestly think whether he intends to run or not, that would serve him best politically, too.
But right now, you don't question that his plan is to run for re-election.
I just don't bother speculating about stuff like that right now, David. I'm really focused on trying to keep democracy from falling into a fascist pit.
Fair. That's a good thing to focus on, I would say, actually. We've been speaking with Rachel Bitecofer, election forecaster, analyst. The podcast is The Election Whisperer. Rachel, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you don't mind, I'll plug my new book that is
Please.
going to be coming out in 2023 by Crown, and it's called "Hit 'em Where It Hurts: How to Save Democracy by Beating Republicans at Their Own Game." And
Well, I'm
again,
sure
that's
we'll
not
have
going
you on to talk about it when the book is out. Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Rachel.
to